Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and today we're going to be walking through the first of 4 courses on the loop package. By the end of this course, you should be able to use the loop package to repeat certain blocks of code a preset number of times, or until some condition is met by a file or a folder. Just like the if package, the loop package gives you a lot of options when it comes to finding ways to automate different manual processes. The basic concept behind a loop is that any code within the loop will repeat until a condition that you set is met. For instance, maybe your loop keeps repeating until it's repeated itself 10 times, or maybe you've set the loop to repeat until a certain file no longer exists. These 2 basic types of loops are referred to in A360 as iterator loops and while loops. Iterator loops are loops that iterate through a set of objects, such as the set of numbers 1 through 10. In other words, the loop repeats the process we gave it 10 times, or once for every number in the set of numbers 1 through 10. Other sets, like all of the rows in an Excel spreadsheet or all of the files in a folder, are also iterator loops that we'll go into in more detail in a future course. While loops are a little bit different because they only keep looping while a certain condition is true. Today, we'll be talking about loops that keep repeating while a file or folder does or doesn't exist, but there are also conditions for a loop to keep repeating while a certain application is running or as long as a window exists or not. These loops depend heavily on the conditions that are occurring while your bot's running, and so while they're much more powerful, they can also result in some unexpected behavior when used improperly. Let's get started. Let's go ahead and get some hands-on experience with loops. Make sure that you log into the control room and navigate to the automation section. Then, navigate to your Citizen Developer folder and create a new subfolder called Loop 101. Once you've created that folder, we're ready to get started. Let's start by creating a new bot within our new Loop 101 folder. For this bot, we're going to pretend that we work for a political polling organization that's attempting to determine approval ratings for the current local government leader. As an employee of this polling organization, it's our job to call 5 people on our list every day and ask them their age and if they approve of the leader, yes or no. Their answers will get added to a CSV along with the current date and the order in which they were called. We want to build a bot that we can use to help us with this task while we're calling the numbers on our list. With all that in mind, let's call this bot CD15-polling data. And then click Create and Edit to get to the RPA workspace. Before we get started with the loop, let's work on the process that we'll be looping. We need to log people's age and approval status to a CSV 5 times every day, so let's start by using prompt commands to ask for those 2 data points. I'll head over to the Action sidebar and find the prompt package, then grab a for-value command and drag that into the bot. I'll put the bot name CD15-polling data as the prompt window caption. And for the prompt message, I'll put, "How old are you?" Finally, we need to assign the value to a variable. And since we have multiple data points we'll be asking for, let's click on the Create Variable icon to the right of the dropdown and create a new variable called age. Now we need to know if the pollee approves of the local leader or not. Let's say this leader's name is Clay Davis. This time, since we're asking a yes or no question, we can use the prompt for yes/no command. I'll drag that over from the Action sidebar just below our prompt for value command and start filling it out. Again, the bot name can be in the prompt window caption, CD15-polling data. But for the message, let's put, "Do you approve of the way Clay Davis is doing his job?" We can again use the Create Variable icon to create a variable called Approval Status, which will hold the answer to that question. And as you might see here, it says that I'm using invalid characters, and that's because I typed a space, and we're not allowed to use spaces in our variables. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that now, and press Create and Select. Now we need to add this data to a CSV, so let's head back to the Actions sidebar and find the Log to File package. Then drag the Log to File command underneath both of our prompt commands. I'll click on Browse next to the File Path field and navigate to the desktop. Here, I'll create a new folder called CD15-polling data. Then, I'll open that folder and copy the file path by clicking to the right of the new folder name in the address bar near the top of the window. Once you've copied that folder path, click Cancel to close this window and paste that path into the file path field. We'll add a backslash and then call this file pollingdata.csv. Right now, we have the age and approval status. So let's click on the Enter Text to Log field and press F2 to bring up the Insert a Value pop-up. We'll select Age from the drop-down, and then click Yes, Insert. Then, we need to add a comma to separate this from the approval status. We can then click F2 again and select Approval Status as our second value. We know we also need the date, so let's click the Append Timestamp checkbox as well. However, like I mentioned in a previous course, this checkbox will put that date and time before everything else we're logging, and in the same column as our first variable, which is age. We want those to be in separate columns, so let's put a comma in front of age to separate the two. Finally, we need to know the order of each caller, 1 through 5. For that, we'll need to use our new loop command, so let's go to the Actions sidebar and look for the loop package. Inside, you'll see that there are 3 commands: loop, continue, and break. I'll be going over continue and break in a future course, so you can ignore those for now and drag the loop command right before our other 3 commands. You'll see the loop options appear in the right sidebar, and fortunately for us, it defaults to the iterator loop type. It's also already set to for n times in the iterator option dropdown. This option makes it so that the loop will continue looping until it's done so n number of times. That's what we want it to do, so we'll leave it as is, but if you're curious and want to see more iterator options before I go over them in the Junior Developer course, feel free to explore this dropdown. We need to tell the loop command how many times to loop, and we can see here that it's already set to 10. We only need to loop 5 times, so let's change that to 5. Finally, we can optionally assign the current value to a variable. That means that we can store the number of current times the loop has executed into a variable, which would be perfect for knowing the order that we called each person. Let's use the Create Variable icon to make a new variable, and we'll see that it automatically calls this one counter. That works for me, so let's click on Create and Select. Now our loop command is set up the way we like it, but just like the if command, we need to drag the actions we want to loop inside of the loop command. We'll select all 3 of our commands down below, then drag them up into the Drag an Action Here section. Now we can see that they're indented, and if we click on the caret to the left of the loop command, the command collapses with all 3 commands inside. That means we've done this correctly. Now let's go back to our log to file command and add our counter variable. In the Enter Text to Log field, let's add a comma after approval status and press F2. We'll look through the dropdown, but our counter variable isn't in here. Why? Let's expand the variables section on the left sidebar to see if we can tell why it's not there. First, we'll need to cancel out of this screen. Then head over to the left sidebar, and where it says Variables near the top, find the Show button to the right and click on that. Well, I can see the counter variable right there below approval status, but I also notice that there's a hash symbol in front of it, instead of the usual double quote symbol. That's because the counter variable is a number type variable, instead of the typical string type variable that we've been using so far. Number variables are used for mathematical operations, and can't be logged as they are like string variables can. So we need to turn our number variable into a string. Let's expand the actions portion of the sidebar again and find the number package. The last command in here is called toString, which sounds like what we need, so let's grab that command and put it just before our log to file command inside of the loop. This command converts a number variable to a string type variable, so in the enter a number field, let's press F2. This time, we'll see our counter variable in the dropdown, but not age or approval status, and that's because those variables are strings. A360 will only show you variables that are the right type for what you're trying to do, so if your variable doesn't show up in the list, it's not intended to be used with this field. Anyway, let's select our counter variable, and then press Yes Insert. Below that field, we can decide how many decimal places we want to show, but since we're just counting from 1 to 5, we can leave that as 0. Then, we need to assign the output to a variable, so let's click on the Create Variable icon again. If I try to name this variable counter, we won't be able to move forward, and we'll get a message saying that we're already using that name. Let's add the word string to the end so that we have a different name, but also one that describes what we're using it for. Then press Create and select. Now that we've converted our number variable to a string variable, we should be able to finish our log to file command by clicking after the last comma in the Enter Text to Log section of that command. Then press F2. Now, in the dropdown, we can see our counter string variable in the list of available variables, so let's select that and press Yes Insert. This bot's almost done, but right now we're building a CSV file that doesn't have any headers, so let's add some. First, let's copy-paste the log to file command. Then open up the first one for editing, since we want the header to come before we log the data. In here, we can leave everything the same except for the Enter Text to Log field. Let's use what we have to write our headers. The first column is the date and time, so before the first comma, let's put the word date. The second column holds the age, and the third column holds the approval status, so let's just delete the $signs around both of those variables so that we type those words instead of the values stored in the variables. Finally, we want to log the order that we called these people, so instead of counter string, let's remove that variable entirely and just type order of call. Finally, let's uncheck the append timestamp box so that we don't accidentally add a timestamp to our headers. The last thing we want to do is make sure the header only gets logged on the very first time that we run the bot. So let's use an if condition to make sure that the command on line 5 only happens if the file doesn't exist. In the Actions sidebar, let's go to the if package. Then, drag an if command just before our first log to file command on line 5. For the condition, we'll select File does not exist under the File subheading. We can then go back to one of our log to file commands and copy the file path field. Then, paste it back into our if command. After that, all we need to do is drag our first log to file command inside of the if command, and we're ready to run the bot. Go ahead and click Run when you're ready. Once the bot starts, we'll see our first prompt. Let's put an age in there. I'm going to say 35 and press OK. Our second prompt appears, and we can enter the polee's response to our second question. I'm going to select yes and press OK. Once I do that, the loop continues and our first question reappears. Go ahead and perform this process again 4 more times, but try to enter in different data each time. Once you're done, let's minimize Chrome and open our CD15 polling data folder on the desktop. Inside, you should see our pollingdata.csv. Let's open that up. Inside, we can see our 4 headers: date, age, approval status, and order of call. In each column, we can see the different ages and approval statuses that we got, as well as the date and time of each entry and the order in which they occurred. If I were to run this bot again, I would have 5 more entries added, all with date and time included. If you'd like, run this bot a few more times before we move on to observe the results. Be sure to close this file before you run the bot though, or you'll get an error when it tries to log the results to the open file. Let's head back to the workspace and close down the success message and close the bot to get back to the control room. Now, let's build a bot that we can use to try out the while loop option. For this bot, let's pretend that we work for a large telecommunications company that needs to issue new 7-character serial numbers and send them to 5 different manufacturers. Our job is to create these serial numbers and store them in TXT files, but each manufacturer can only accept a file that is right around 64 kilobytes. With that in mind, let's start a new bot and call it CD16-serial numbers. Now that we're in the RPA workspace, we know that we need to build 5 different files that are 64 kilobytes each, but let's start with the most basic part of the process: creating and logging the serial number. Let's start by creating a single serial number. For this, I'm going to go to the Actions sidebar and scroll down to the String package. When I expand the String package, I'll find the Generate Random String command. Let's drag that into the main workspace. Then, we'll see the options for this command in the right sidebar. Basically, we just need to tell it how long each serial number should be, so we can put 7 in the string length field. We can then assign this to a variable, so let's again click the Create Variable icon, and when the pop-up appears, we'll name this one Serial Number. Then, we need to log that serial number to a file. So let's find a log to file command from the Actions sidebar and bring that into the main workspace, just below our Generate Random String command. Let's click Browse, and then navigate to the desktop. Then, create a new folder called CD16-serial numbers. Navigate into that new folder. Then, click just to the right of the new folder name in the address bar field near the top of the window. Copy that folder path, then close this window and paste it into the file path field of your log to file command. Add a backslash, and then let's call this file MFR for manufacturer, and then just add .txt to the end so that we're logging to a TXT file. For the text to log field, we can click in there and again press F2, and we'll select our serial number variable from the available options. Now our bot is creating and logging serial numbers, but we need it to keep doing that until the file is 64 kilobytes. For that, let's go to the loop package in the Actions sidebar and find a loop command to drag just above our Generate Random String command. This time, instead of selecting iterator for our loop type, let's select while. Like I mentioned earlier, while loops will keep looping while our conditions are true. So let's open up the conditions dropdown. If we scroll down to the file and folder sections, we'll see that we have a few options here to keep the loop going, such as while a file or folder does or doesn't exist. We need to keep looping until our file reaches 64 kilobytes, so let's select the file size option. Just as a note, I'll be going over the file date and file extension options in the Junior Developer Learning track, but I didn't want you to think I was skipping them unintentionally. Anyway, now that we've selected that file size condition, we get some new options to play with. First, we need our file path, which we can copy from our log to file command and then paste back here. Then, we need to choose one of the radio buttons below. We need to select the option that keeps the loop going while our file is less than 64 kilobytes. So let's select less than as our option here, and then set the size to 64 in the size field below. You'll notice that there are several options here, such as greater than, not equal, and less than, or equal. These are all fairly self-explanatory, but if you need to think about these differently, think about them as if statements that occur at the beginning of the loop. If the file size is less than 64 kilobytes, keep looping. Finally, you'll see a checkbox below the options for our file size condition that says, check the condition at the end of this iteration. This option allows us to check the condition after one iteration of the loop. That gives us a little more flexibility if we have a condition that can't possibly be true until we're inside of the loop. For instance, if we wanted to repeat code if it experienced an error, we would need to check this box. If we didn't, then when we got to the loop, it would immediately check if there was an error with the code inside of the loop. Since we haven't even run the code yet, there won't have been an error, and so it'll skip the loop entirely. Instead, we would check that box so that the code runs, and only after the first iteration of the loop is done will it check to see if there's an error. For this bot, we actually do need to check that box, because at the beginning of this loop, it's checking if the file size is less than 64 kilobytes. Technically, we are less than 64 kilobytes because we have no file at all, but the way that the bot will read that is that there's no file to check at all, so we definitely need this to loop through at least once before it starts checking that condition. Anyway, now that we have our loop, let's drag our other two lines of code inside of it. This will make it so that our bot will continuously log serial numbers to our file until the file is 64 kilobytes. However, we already know that we'll be performing this process 5 times, so let's bring another loop command over from the Actions sidebar and put it right above our other loop. In the Options on the right sidebar, let's set this to loop 5 times, and let's assign the current value to a new variable by clicking the Create Variable icon. Counter is a good name for this variable, so let's leave that as is. Now that we have our loop 5 times command, let's drag the other loop inside of it to create a nested loop. These loops within loops are called nested loops because one loop is nested inside of the other, and I'll be using that term for the rest of the courses on this site. To distinguish between loops, we can call them outer and inner loops. In this bot, the outer loop is the loop 5 times command because it's the outermost loop that we can see visually. The inner loop is the loop while file size command, because it is inside of our outer loop. Anyway, the last thing you may have noticed is that if we were to run this code right now, it would check the file size of the same mfr.txt file each of the 5 times through our outer loop. We needed to create and check a different file each time that the outer loop executes, so let's use that counter variable to name the different files that we produce. We can do that by getting that number to string command from the Actions sidebar. So let's look for the number package, then expand that and get the toString command. We'll drag that command into our outer loop, but just before the loop while file size command. For the Enter a Number field, click inside and press F2, then select the counter variable from the available options, and press Yes Insert. Then, when we assign the output, let's again use the create variable icon and make a variable called counterString. Finally, we need to change the file path of our loop while file size and log to file commands. Let's open our loop while file size command and expand the condition. Then click just between the MFR and the .txt. Here we can press F2 and use the Insert a Value dropdown to select our counterString variable. We can then copy this file path and paste it over the file path we have in our log to file command as well. Now our bot will be checking and logging to different files each time that it loops through the outer loop, because on the first loop it'll be MFR1, then MFR2, then MFR3, and so on. Anyway, it looks like we're ready to go, so let's click Run and see what happens. When it finishes running, go ahead and close the success message. Then minimize Chrome and let's take a look at the files it created by opening up the CD16 folder on the desktop. It looks like we have 5 files that are all 65 kilobytes, and inside of each one there are several thousand serial numbers. These files are 65 kilobytes instead of 64 kilobytes because the log to file command actually adds a new line after each serial number. Let's open up the file and scroll all the way down to the very bottom and find that new line. Press backspace to delete that new line. Then close the file, but make sure you save it on your way out. Now you'll see that it updated to 64 kilobytes. Another thing you might have noticed is that this file is 7,282 lines, which means we just created 5 times that number of serial numbers in less than a minute. Great work! And that's it. Now you know the basic details of the loop package. How to use the iterator loop type to repeat code a set number of times, and how to use the while loop type to loop as long as a certain condition is true. Just make sure that you don't cut corners when thinking about how to implement your loops, because while these loops are extremely powerful, they also have the potential to create a lot of chaos very quickly if they're implemented improperly.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. For more RPA training, check out the next video here, or watch everything in order right here. Subscribe to my channel for updates on new content, and become a patron to get access to personalized RPA support. But until next time, I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and I hope this helps you build better bots.